welcome to the continuation of meeting number 142 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance pursuant to Standing Order 108 Bracket 2 and the House of Commons, in 108 Bracket 2, the committee is meeting to discuss the subject matter of Bill C-69, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget table in Parliament on April 16, 2024. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to Standing Order 15.1. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all members that other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. Please only use the black approved earpiece, members. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of a meeting. When you're not using your earpiece, please place it face down in the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For members in the room, please use a raised hand. If you wish to speak, for members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And now we are resuming debate on the motion of Mr. Turnbull and the amendment of Mr. Howland, the sub-amendment of Mr. Morantz. And going back to my speaking order, MP Morantz is not here, so I have next MP Howland to speak.
Thank you, Chair.
MP Lawrence.
And I will concede the floor to my friend, Philip Lawrence, who will talk about this very common sense sub-amendment to a very common sense amendment. So I'll pass the floor over to
Thank you, MP Howland. And I do have another person to the list after MP Lawrence, MP Zarowitz.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's candidly a little bit disappointing that we don't have the ability to talk to the Minister of Finance and Deputy Leader, Ms. Chrystia Freeland today. We were looking forward to having a robust discussion. I know myself, I've personally had many interesting discussions with Ms. Freeland, discussing such things as the gap in GDP per capita in the Canada and the U.S. and some of the financial struggles. So just to sort of set the stage, as it were, for the discussion that, and I unfortunately, I suspect a lengthy discussion as to where we are right now. And so what sort of, and I did, and I don't want to tell tales of the school, have a discussion with the parliamentary secretary, which was very upfront this morning, and I appreciate his candor. But the challenge is that we started sort of off on the wrong foot. And that he surprised us with a programming motion. So for those watching in the media or just simply at home watching, so programming motion sets up sort of the organization of the business. Normally this is done through a collaborative, cooperative process, even when parties are having very heated exchange over their various different ideas and thoughts as to how the government, there has to be certain administrative and procedural agreements. And in the last couple of years, while sitting on the Finance Committee, I've had the privilege to negotiate that with various Liberal members, including Mr. Terry Beach. Yvonne and I also had some chats as well in the interim, and certainly it was not always, I guess, friendly, but it was always respectful. And Mr. Beach, for example, would nearly always give me the opportunity to discuss and have input prior to a motion being brought forward. And while we didn't always agree, I very much appreciated that from the former parliamentary secretary, now Minister of Fixing Government, I believe is his title or something like that. And so I was very surprised when we came. In fairness, and I said I try to be as much as possible an advocate for the truth. So in fairness, there was a subcommittee meeting, but that meeting broke down, and I would have expected here's maybe a courtesy call, as candidly I got this morning, and I appreciate that. If I'm not telling tales of the school, Mr. Turnbull, and I would very much have appreciated a call beforehand, and maybe we would have had a discussion. And so what we've got is programming motion that called for really a very short amount of testimony, and I understand that the government and certainly the NDP actually brought a sub-amendment to increase that. So that's a positive sign. But this programming motion is still deficient in a number of different ways, and it's not. I want to sort of characterize this correctly too. It's not that I'm objecting for Philip Lawrence or the Conservative Party or Pierre Poilievre. I'm objecting for the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South. This is a massive document, over 600 pages, and I think even some of just the finite tax provisions in it could be the subject of lengthy debate and discussion, because anytime you're amending the Income Tax Act, it's a massive document, and there's nearly always knock-on effects from that amendment. And so we need significantly more, and I am pleased that Mr. Davies did bring a sub-amendment to expand that, and I think that's a step in the right direction. The challenge is that Conservatives really want to know what the direction of the government is, and in order to know the direction of the government, we need to hear from them, and from not. We've certainly heard enough from their current leader, but we need to hear from their future leader to know what the direction is, to help us understand and convey that to our constituents. And so, for example, we have seen Prime Minister Trudeau been absolutely unequivocal that he is going to continue with his carbon tax, and that he's going to actually quadruple that carbon tax, and it has said that there'll be no variation from this plan. In fact, his environment minister has said if in fact there's any deviation from the carbon tax, he will resign. And so that is absolutely crystal clear. What we don't know is what the Liberal plan is with respect to the carbon tax going forward, if there is a change in leadership. And so we have the deputy leader, who's of course one of the likely Liberal candidates, for 1 hour, but really that's not sufficient to discuss, even just in her role as Minister of Finance, much less as the future potential leader of the party, an hour to discuss a 600-page document that will affect every Canadian through one provision or another. And some of these are quite in-depth and quite, these are not simple provisions. And when we talk about some of the tax changes specifically, just one of those changes could easily take up 2 or 3 hours. And I would suspect that many individuals that haven't had the briefing that they fully need to fully understand some of the ramifications, right, of tax policy. So really, we need Ms. Freeland, the deputy leader and Minister of Finance, for at least 2 hours. And then the other challenge that Conservatives have, and that we would really like to hear from, is from Mark Carney. I think it's no surprise that to many Liberals he is the heir apparent as we move forward. And I don't know whether we'll see a resignation from the Prime Minister or not. I don't know if he knows that, but clearly things are not going well. And while it doesn't appear as though that their members will push the Prime Minister out the door, it does appear as though he's frustrated, and clearly the economy and other factors are pointing to an early exit. And so, that being the case, there's a high likelihood that we're going to have Mark Carney as a new Liberal leader. And so what we're asking for is to have Mr. Carney, who has in the past been an outspoken advocate for the carbon tax. He's a huge proponent of the consumer-driven carbon tax. However, he's in recent years, recent days almost, I should say, including in recent Senate testimony, had seemed to equivocate. And when asked directly about it, he wouldn't give a yes or no answer. In fact, he quite adeptly equivocated, I guess, getting ready for his career in politics. And so we want to ask him: will a Carney-led Liberal government have a consumer carbon tax? We've heard the NDP actually equivocate on this point in recent months. There, the leader of the NDP stating that maybe the consumer-led carbon tax was not the best direction. And so while they continue to support and prop up the regime of Prime Minister Trudeau's Liberals, which is on track to quadruple that carbon tax, Canadians deserve to know whether the future Liberal or future leaders or candidates, whether Deputy Leader Freeland or former Governor of the Bank of Canada Mark Carney would indeed support would support a consumer carbon tax. The other issue that I would really like to talk to Mr. Carney about is what his thoughts are on the actions of the current Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem. Of course, during the pandemic, he said, Mr. Macklem said that interest rates would be low for long. He said that would be low for long. And you know what? Many Canadians relied on that, and so they selected variable mortgages. They had shorter renewal terms on their mortgages, thinking that interest rates would be, as Mr. Macklem said, unequivocally, I might add, it will be low for long. And so I would really like to know whether Mr. Carney would criticize Mr. Macklem's actions there. And then I'd also like to know, because our inflation doesn't seem to get down, and this is often the case with inflation. We saw this in the 70s and the 80s. Getting that first part of inflation down is oftentimes the quote-unquote easy part. It's that last mile where inflation gets really sticky and hard to remove. And so we've heard past comments from Tiff Macklem saying that excessive government spending was unhelpful because it boosts demand, which will increase the prices and the costs of nearly everything, raising inflation. And so I'd love to hear from the future Liberal leader whether he would reduce spending or would he continue with the $54 billion of interest that the debt is being paid. That's more than the entire healthcare transfers. Just imagine if we did not have a national debt in Canada. If we did not have that national debt, we would be able to double our healthcare spending. That's really amazing, right? The other, and this is pointed out by Thomas Mulcair, former leader of the NDP government, is what he said, which is interesting, is that the amount of the interest is equal to the entire revenue collected by the goods and sales tax, the GST, across the country. So if we didn't have that $1.3 trillion national debt, we would be able to cancel the GST, the Liberal promise from many years ago, which still has, I guess, yet to come to fruition. And so when I think having Mr. Carney here is an absolutely request. He came before the Senate, so he's clearly not shy and has the opportunity to or has a willingness to go before public officials. It does get to me. I try not to in politics, or as little as possible, speculate on people's intentions, because I do believe that most people's intentions are good, and I think you get into a dangerous world when you start speculating on the intentions of our colleagues, and it's hard to look into someone's heart, but it does make you wonder, like, what is the breaks here? What is the Liberal government afraid of? That they will not allow Mr. Carney to testify in front of the Finance Committee. I would maybe they're protecting. Maybe the Prime Minister prefers his successor to be the deputy leader, and he doesn't want Mr. Carney to come here and outshine him, or maybe it's a Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien type of thing, where they're afraid of Mr. Carney making too much of a splash here. I would hope it wouldn't be that Mr. Carney was afraid to answer questions. Clearly, as a governor of Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, he's hopefully faced tough questions. In fact, I'm mindful of an exchange that I saw between our current leader of the official opposition, Mr. Poilievre, in asking Mr. Carney some difficult questions. And I don't think anyone can say Mr. Carney did a great job of answering those questions. But if I were him, I might want to have an opportunity to redeem myself and to come before a Finance Committee. And if nothing else, just for altruistic reasons, I would think Mr. Carney would want to share his experience here with us. And so specifically on that, I have talked at length about productivity and the importance of economic growth in order to bring prosperity to our country. And I'm not the only one who, of course, there's a wide sympathy of voices across economic experts. I would rattle off the names of Bill Morneau, John Manley, the C.D. Howe Institute, the Fraser Institute. Even current Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has talked about it, and of course, most recently, Carolyn Rogers gave her famous Break Glass speech about productivity. The challenge, and you know who else has spoken about productivity is actually Mark Carney, and he's criticized his government for their lack of focus on economic growth and their lack of focus on productivity. And so I would welcome him into the discussion. It is a nut that Canada hasn't been able to crack, but it's and I said, out of fairness, it has been a 30-year odd problem, but it's gotten significantly worse over the last 10 years. And you can see that comes through in the numbers, because if you look at a chart, and I tried to show the chart, but the chair said I wasn't allowed to use props, so I tried to show the chart to the Minister of Finance, but there's a clear departure in 2015 of GDP per capita in the United States of America versus GDP per capita in Canada, and that starts about 2015, 2016, and it's now wider. That gap between income per Canadian versus income per American, it has never been wider in recent history, like in the last 100 years. We have, and of course, the productivity crisis has led us to the lost decade in Canada. We've had virtually no economic growth in the last 10 years. Our GDP per capita has more or less been flat, and that really is an outlier. We are the worst in the G7 in the last 5 years in our growth of GDP per capita, and we continue to be a laggard. And actually, our GDP per capita is in our, I believe, it's seventh negative quarter. And the question I would have asked Minister Freeland would be to ask her, have you looked at these numbers? Could you explain to the committee why our economy is the worst in the G7, looking at a GDP per capita lens? Why are Canadians having to suffer through the seventh quarter of declining GDP per capita. These were the questions I would ask Minister Freeland, and quite frankly, I'd put them to former Governor Mark Carney as well. We really need to have these discussions for the BIA because I think it's important for Canadians to know, and quite frankly, we need to start having the conversation now about the economic changes that Canada needs to get ourselves back on strong footing. And like I said, it's not just me talking about this. It is the C.D. Howe Institute. It's Bill Morneau. It's John Manley. It is the Fraser Institute. It's Ian Lee. It is Jack Mintz. Noted economists, and it doesn't really matter whether they're left, right, or center. There's a near consensus across this country that the numbers are the numbers, and that we are struggling mightily when it comes to productivity. These challenges continue to plague our country as we go forward, and we really need to have a discussion, not just at the boardroom tables on Bay Street, but at the coffee shops on Main Street, about how Canada gets out of this economic hole. Because as my colleague Damien Kirk talked about a little bit in his speech last night in the House, he talked about the fact that when you're at the beginning, if you're driving or if you're piloting a boat or piloting a plane, and you've got a long journey, if early on in that journey you make even a slight error in navigation, that can have massive consequences down the lane. And we actually saw this underneath Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So, of course, Pierre Elliott Trudeau ran up massive deficits, and that left the Mulroney government in a difficult position. They actually ran structural surpluses, meaning that if you took out the interest payments which were accrued, or the debt that was accrued underneath the Trudeau government, every year underneath the Mulroney government, they actually took in more than they spent. Part of that was because of the tremendous economic growth, no doubt spurred on by the free market policies of the Mulroney government. But the challenge was what they carried along with them was a Pierre Elliott Trudeau legacy, and that's what we're really sadly at the beginning of a debt or deficit crisis if we don't get ourselves back on course. Right now we're at $54 billion in interest, and sure, if the minister was here, I am sure the first response to some of my economic questions would be, we have a AAA credit rating, and that's true for now. The reality is, though, if we don't course correct on the debt and deficit, we won't, because sooner or later the interest gets to such a force. In fact, Albert Einstein said that the most powerful force in the universe is compounding numbers, or compounding interest, meaning that if you are on the wrong side of this, and that's what we are now, at the wrong side of this, with $54 billion of interest being paid, it starts consuming more and more, and eventually gets to a point where Canada will no longer be able to pay its bills. Already, we're at the point where we're spending more on interest than we are on healthcare, and there's more interest being paid than the entire amount collected by the GST. Like, alarm flags should be coming out. The challenge too is that there is a bit of a spiral effect in this as well. So the more resources in general, and I'm sure my NDP colleague might add some caveats in here, I'm sure, that the businesses have to be spending their money on investment. They have to be spending their money on their workers, and quite frankly, I agree with him on that. But in general, the more resources the private sector has, the more effective they can be at investing, innovating, and becoming competitive and creating prosperity for their country. As as you suck more and more of the of the revenue of wealth from the private sector and give it to the public sector, not for goods, not for virtuous services like, for example, some of our social safety net or healthcare or productive resources, but just to give to banks and bondholders in the form of interest payments, you reduce the efficiency, the effectiveness of the economy. And so what happens is the economy actually starts to shrink, which means there's less revenue, which means the government has to increase rates. And then it goes back again. Then the economy shrinks more. Then rates go up more. And you get into this negative sort of debt spiral trap. And we've seen this in non-advanced economies, and it's had devastating consequences. And we've had many economists talk about this. And so what we need to do is get our spending under control. The leader has put forward a dollar for dollar plan. The leader of the official opposition, saying that for every new dollar that we need to spend, and there'll certainly be new dollars that we have to spend, we're going to match that with savings from somewhere else. And this government has talked about potential savings, but as the member from Simcoe North has talked about, is that while in fact the government has planned to generate savings through attrition in the public sector, they have yet to sort of publish any type of plan that will allow it to happen. So all that we see is a government that continues to spend more and more money. And the member from Abbotsford, he's gone. We got what happened there? I was so involved there. We've got a new member to the left of me. Ed Fast is gone. Marty Morantz is gone.
Normally to the right.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. You are. Yeah. And so as a member from Ed Fast, the member from Abbotsford, has talked about many times, we can't let that spending get out of control. And the reason is not because conservatives want in any shape or form any type of austerity when it comes to government or otherwise, but it's to prevent austerity. The type of austerity we saw during the 90s era underneath the Chrétien-Martin Liberal government, when they dramatically cut healthcare transfers because the debt, which was largely accrued underneath Pierre Elliott Trudeau, had gotten to such a point where banks and bondholders basically cut the country off. And so that led to very, very dramatic reductions in healthcare transfers and other spendings. Conservatives want to protect that healthcare and other government spending by making sure that we are fiscally responsible now. And so if the Minister of Finance, a deputy leader, were here, she would no doubt tell me that we are actually, Mr. Lawrence, we're on track to hit all three of our guardrails. The reality is, though, that's on very shaky ground, and I'll tell you why. A number of the economic forecasts in the budget have very positive, bullish forecasts, such as increasing the GDP. The other issue that they have is that we haven't yet seen the capital gains legislation, and they need, in order to make that budget work, they need $7 billion in the first year from the capital gains. Otherwise, they miss two of the three guardrails, and I confirmed that with testimony with the PBO, and that those guardrails being the debt to GDP ratio not increasing and the deficit not increasing, and so they would miss 2 out of 3 of those guardrails, and quite frankly, right now that capital gains legislation just hasn't appeared. And you might say, well, Mr. Lawrence, you know what? Like, we've got the whole year to gain additional revenue from the capital gains, so just relax. I'm sure it'll be, and we might even get some retroactively. But no, that's not the case here, because the government has set up an artificial fire sale by saying that the legislation goes in place June 24th and June 25th. And so I have no doubt that there are Canadians right now who are preparing to sell their property to take advantage of the current capital gains rate as opposed to what it would be. But until there's certainty and Canadians know that the capital gains is actually going up through the introduction of legislation, I'm sure that there are many that are just waiting to see whether this legislation will actually come into a place or not. And that we're quickly approaching June 20. I think it's 24th. I can never remember if it's 24th or 25th. We're quickly approaching that timeline. And if the government doesn't introduce this capital gains legislation, which for political purposes they decided to pull out of the budget, they will not hit 2 out of 3 of their guardrails, which means we have more spending, which is going to put us further down that spiral, that debt and deficit spiral going forward, which will worsen our economic growth. We are already, as I've said, last I checked in, Mr. Davies wasn't sure whether he agreed with me or not, but I'll say it again, and maybe I'll have a chance to agree or disagree. We'll see. That it's my contention that while Canada's GDP growth has been just high enough to keep us out of a quote-unquote technical recession, if you look at the GDP per capita or the economic reality of the average Canadian, that has been negative for much more than 2 quarters continuously, the definition of a technical recession. In fact, we're in 7 quarters. And that would actually that means that while Canada as a country is not in recession, Canadians are. In fact, we are in one of the longest recessions that has occurred since the Great Depression, and that is a great segue to talking about what Philip Cross said, saying that in terms of GDP per capita or the economic circumstances of the average Canadian, we are in the worst economy since the Great Depression. So when we look at the severity and the seriousness of the economic situation we're in, I don't think Conservatives are being unreasonable. I really don't. By asking for 2 things. One, really 3 things in total, one of which has already been agreed upon, which is additional hours of study. And for 665 pages, I don't think 30 hours is much. In fact, I've actually thought that maybe a good change in process here. So for those who don't know, parliamentarians get a technical briefing for maybe a couple hours, of which we are responsible for within 24 hours reading 665 pages of extremely technical information. And by the by, when you say 665, those 665 are actually amending thousands of other pages. And in order to understand those 600 or so pages of amending legislation, you have to understand the other thousands of pages of legislation. So one of the changes to the process, while I have the floor here, that I'd love to put forward to the government for the next budget would actually have members of the bureaucracy who many have great depth of understanding of these changes and the context around them. Each of them give a presentation of maybe 5 or 10 minutes on the substantive on the substance of the changes. And so there might be in a budget, I don't know, maybe 100 different substantive changes. And so it might be a couple days. I would certainly sign on to working from dawn up till to sundown to fully understand that and to gain some of the, have some of the knowledge that's held in our bureaucracy transferred to the politicians. And so that's one of the changes I thought would be a great idea. And I was actually a little bit surprised, Mr. Davies, for although he did, in fairness, ask for additional time, and I appreciate that, and Conservatives agree, said that some of the testimony got repetitive. I think I didn't really see that, but to the extent that it did, I think that we could have eliminated that by having the public service put forward a substantive discussion of each one of the provisions that are being changed. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's unreasonable. when you look at the provisions that are in place that are going to affect literally every Canadian from coast to coast, to have that millions, even billions of dollars, maybe in some cases, quite frankly, like if you look at the entire global trillions of dollars, to have a discussion of each one of the objects for 5 or 10 minutes, and let them present to parliamentarians about the substance of the issue. And I think if we did that, we would give Parliament a good base, parliamentarians a good base to then have fruitful, meaningful, constructive discussions about the individual areas. And because, like I said, the way the budgetary process works is so when we have the briefing, it was within 24 hours. And by the by, the night before, we were working hard at finance, trying to get the fall economic statement through, which left us very little time to study those 600 odd pages, and to really fully understand that budget. And then, instead of being briefed on some of the technical provisions, we were just sort of told, okay, ask any questions you want. Well, I certainly did my best to try and review and understand it, but it's hard to consume that massive amount of information in a very short period of time. And that's why I believe that I think a great change to the budgetary process would be to have members of the bureaucracy brief us on each one of those changes. So, like I said, if there's 100 changes at 5 minutes pop or 10 minutes pop, might be 500 or 1,000 minutes. That's each one of those minutes is compared to changes. I'm sure is hundreds of thousands of dollars of changes that will affect for each minute. And so, like I said, I would throw that out as a constructive suggestion. Now, I do want to sort of respond to what I expect will be some comments from the parliamentary secretary, amongst others, that Conservatives are holding up this legislation, and I think, quite frankly, our track record, specifically over the beginning of this year, actually rebuts that quite conclusively. If you look at the clause by clause, so this is where the rubber meets the road when we as parliamentarians decide on what's in the legislation and what's not in the legislation. We Conservatives were actually agreeable at candidly the NDP's request to start grouping sections so that we could move quickly. In fact, my colleague, Mr. Singh Halan, he actually withdrew some of his amendments so that we could get the fall economic statement in quickly. And I would also point to the fact that it was actually a very constructive process where my colleague, Mr. Chambers, said he had, in his considerable experience, seen a budget amended as thoroughly as the fall economic statement implementation was. And so it was a constructive, thorough process. Conservatives were willing to do that going forward. We have, I think, a very reasonable. I won't even put it as a demand. I'll put it as a request to have Mr. Mark Carney for at least 3 hours, and then to have the deputy leader and Minister of Finance for 2 hours. And quite frankly, I don't. Like I said, I don't like it when people speculate on my intentions. I don't think it's fair, and so I try not to do so as well. But I guess I would just throw this out as free advice to the side. Like, Minister Freeland is a very intelligent, eloquent speaker, and so if I were them, I would try and get Minister Freeland up as much as I could. And Mr. Carney has always acquitted himself fairly well. I'm not exactly sure why they're afraid of having two of their future leaders answer some questions. And as Minister Freeland has said before, certainly our exchanges in the past have been respectful. And I don't believe I asked Minister Freeland inappropriate questions, tough questions, but that's sort of the job. And it's my job to ask those questions to make sure that the people of Canada and the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, soon to be Northumberland Clark, are given the answers they know, so they understand. And because when we look at this in context, and of course during the early part of our calendar of a year as parliamentarians, a fair amount of our time is spent in our constituency, and I'm like everyone else, like all other 337 of my colleagues, spend a lot of time at events talking to people, and soon we'll be on the barbecue circuit as well, talking to thousands of people, and it in all sincerity, it really hit home. I've never had a series of interactions like I have in the last, call it 2 or 3 months, with nearly every individual saying one of two things, or both. One is, I am really struggling. I've never had these economic conditions before. I've never gone to a food bank. In fact, I have a lifetime of donating to food banks, and now I'm a recipient of the food bank. These are very serious issues, and I'm sure we've all gotten those calls or emails or direct one-on-one interactions. I don't think I'm in a vacuum at all. And so having the deputy finance leader here for 2 hours and having the future Liberal leader, Mark Carney, here for 3 hours to explain their economic plans, their commentary on why Canada is in such a terrible economic shape, I think is quite frankly a reasonable position to be. Like we will right now agree to the scheduling put forward by the NDP and the Liberals, and all we're asking is that we get a little bit of insight from for 2 hours from the current finance.
Point of order, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt your stream of consciousness riveting speech, Mr. Lawrence. I just wanted to make a quick point. It's not really a point of order, but I'll just make a quick comment that might be helpful. The Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, is here and willing to appear today. We had committed to that. You've said multiple times in your speech today that you'd like to ask your tough questions to the Minister of Finance. So I would just respectfully seek unanimous consent so that we can pause this debate, return to it after her appearance, and that way you get your questions in.
Well, it was not a point of order, but the members have heard what P.S. Turnbull has had to say. I don't know if members want to speak to that. MP Lawrence?
Conservatives are agreeable to that.
The Conservatives are agreeable to that, you see? Okay. Great. You may continue. Is the... Oh wait, sorry. The point of order, so is the bloc NDP agreeable to this? Yes, it does. Okay. Okay. MP Lawrence, the floor is yours still.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry, just for
and then I've got MP Chambers after that.
Yeah, thank you. No, my question. So we are agreeable to the UC. What time is the minister coming?
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock. Okay. So we'll just continue on debate until 12 o'clock. Chair, is that what the plan is?
Yeah.
We could suspend if you want. It's as riveting as my speech was.
Members, I'm looking to everybody. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're suspended. Prime Minister, Minister Freeland, thank you very much for extending a opportunity to have you come here before our committee, and the members have agreed to that. So you'll be here with us from 12 to 1, and we will be discussing the budget and C-69. So on that, Minister, you may have some opening remarks. I also want to welcome Mr. Janovic. I hope maybe you want to help me out with that.
You were close, Jovanovic.
Jovanovic, of course, great name, yeah, Jovanovic. And I'm sure the members have many questions for you, Minister. And now you'll have an opportunity to provide some opening remarks, and then we'll get to members' questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm very happy to appear before you and the members of the committee to discuss the Budget Implementation Act. This is intended to put into effect a very large number of budgetary measures. Those measures are found in the BIA, are intended to offer a fair share for all generations, and that deals also with more affordable housing. The Generation Z is having great difficulty becoming property owners, as well as the millennials. If we want to be able to put in place certain measures,
by cracking down on short-term rentals and by banning foreign buyers of Canadian homes. We're making life cost less, and we're strengthening Canada's social safety net for every generation, from expanding the Canada Student Loan Forgiveness Program to workers across healthcare and social services who work in rural and remote communities, to launching a national school food program, to making switching internet and phone plans easier and more affordable. We're also increasing investment and productivity, including by delivering 2 more major investment tax credits to attract more private investment, create more good-paying jobs, and grow the economy. Mr. Chair, these investments are built upon a fiscally responsible plan. Last week, Moody's, one of the leading credit ratings agencies, reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating with a stable outlook. Moody's also predicts that, over the medium term, Canada will see more growth than some other AAA economies, and that inflation will remain near the Bank of Canada's midpoint target of 2%. This is a powerful, independent, objective proof point. A AAA credit rating means Canada's economy is strong and resilient. It means our economic plan is fiscally responsible. It means we can afford to make the investments Canada needs and create the good jobs Canadians need. It means the federal government can responsibly invest and borrow at lower costs, as can other orders of government and Canadian businesses. Notre cote de crédit AAA montre également.
Our AAA credit rating shows that any type of incendiary statement that is made is misleading to Canadians. The government's plan is a very responsible plan. The reality is that many politicians do not want to make the necessary investments to help young Canadians, whereas the Conservative Party is looking for excuses to not make investments in the future of Canadians. Our government is acting to ensure Canadians' future. That is why our government is implementing the BIA as quickly as possible to help young Canadians who are counting on us. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
And we're going to go to our first round of questions. And I just wanted to, Minister, I'm sure you are aware, we do have some new new member to our committee, MP Don Davies for the NDP, and a new PS Ryan Turnbull here on committee. And now to our first round of questions. We're starting with each party will have up to 6 minutes. We're starting with MP Hallen, please, for the first 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, do you think it was fair to increase the carbon tax 23% when 70% of Canadians told you not to, as 2 million Canadians visit a food bank in a single month? Was that fair?
Mr. Hallen, 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back than they pay in with the price on pollution. We also know that the only way to have a credible, effective economic plan in 2024 is to also have a climate plan. That is what our customers, Canada's customers, are requiring. That is what foreign investors are requiring. And we're seeing the results. In 2023, Canada had more FDI per capita than any other G7 country. That's because we have a strong economic plan that includes a strong climate plan.
Minister, your carbon tax is actually a tax plan and not an environmental plan. And the PBO on multiple occasions came to this committee and proved a lot of the stuff you're saying is misinformation and false. For example, he said just a few weeks ago that a majority of families pay more into this carbon tax than what they get into these rebates that you're talking about. Last time you were here, for example, in your own words, an average Albertan family gets $1,800 in rebates, but I have the PBO report here in my hand that says an average Albertan family pays $2,900 into the carbon tax. Do you think it's fair that an average Albertan family has to pay $1,100 more into the tax? Is that fair to them?
Mr. Hallen, I think the people who are trafficking in misinformation when it comes to a price on pollution are, I'm sad to say, the Conservatives.
PBO wrong?
The average 8 out of 10 Canadian families, very much including Alberta families,
But he said a
get
majority of
more
families
money
are worse
back
off.
than they
Is he
pay
wrong?
in on a price on pollution. That is simply the reality. It has been verified by economists across the country, including the most esteemed economists in Alberta. The reality is this is a revenue neutral plan which is giving money back to Alberta families. And I am delighted that we are now giving money back to small businesses across the country, including small businesses in Alberta. And the final thing that is just so important, and it's important for the province you and I love a lot, Alberta, is the only way for us as an open, trade-exposed economy to have an economic plan that actually works, to actually be able to attract foreign investment, to actually be able to sell what we produce, is to have a strong and credible climate plan. That's what our government has.
So, Minister, I think it's clear to see that by you ducking and dodging the facts that you absolutely are still peddling misinformation about the carbon tax. And someone who claims to love Alberta wouldn't take extra $1,100 in a carbon tax and what they get in rebates. So I just want to make that clear. Recently, as I move on, Mark Carney just testified yesterday at the Senate committee. Someone who will probably be your next leader, and as someone who's rumored to be also a leadership candidate in the next Liberal leadership race. We saw Mark Carney also duck and dodge the question of if he supported the carbon tax. So before you launch your campaign, we wanted to know, will you continue down the path of Justin Trudeau and quadruple the carbon tax?
So, Mr. Hallen, I'm not sure the best use of this committee's precious time is to indulge in political speculation
I think
and
the
political
Canadians need
horse
to know
racing.
if you're
I'm
running
sorry,
for
Mr. Hallen, I didn't
leadership,
interrupt you with your very
quadruple the
long
tax.
comments, and so now I would ask you politely to do me the same courtesy. So let me just be clear, because you have waded pretty far into waters of political speculation. Our party has a leader, and our government has a prime minister. He has the full support of our cabinet and our
Fair
caucus.
enough, Minister, because I have a short amount of time.
Mr.
So
Halan, please don't interrupt
on
me.
that note,
You used up your precious time speculating about party politics. You leave me
And
no
as a
choice
follow-up
but
to that
you give
question,
me no
Minister,
choice but to answer.
I just
and I'm
wanted to
quite
ask,
happy.
then do you
I'm sorry,
support
Mr. Halan.
his
I didn't
quadrupling?
interrupt you.
Minister Yalan, if we could just try to find the right balance here so we can hear and,
Sure.
and we can get some answers.
I'll move on then. Because
I wasn't finished with
wanted
my
to know-
answer,
that's,
Mr.
That's
Halan.
fine. I'll take my time
Point of
because I
order.
only have a limited amount
Point
of
of order.
time.
Chair, I think it's customary for when members ask questions to give witnesses equal weighted amount of time to answer, and I don't believe that the minister has had her time to answer.
So what I do ask is for respect here in the room, and we do have the minister. It is precious time. We have 1 hour. I'm sure you want to hear from the minister and MP Allen. I'm sure you want to pose your questions. So let's find, like I said, the right balance to make this happen.
I'll move on to my next question because I only have a limited amount of time. Minister, under the 9 years of your government, rents have doubled, literally. They were half what they were before your government took over. Rent prices are outpacing income for the first time in 60 years. Your $89 billion photo op slush fund, supposedly for housing, after you announced that, has doubled rents. I want to know, how did you spend $89 billion to double rents?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Halan. And I am actually glad to see all of us paying attention to housing. I think it is one of the most pressing issues for Canada and Canadians, and that is why with this budget and with action we have taken, our government has put forward the most ambitious plan to get more homes built faster in Canadian history. With all of the measures taken together, will mean that nearly 4 million new homes are built by 2031. That is what Canada needs. That is what we are doing. That's what we're investing in. And conservative austerity will not accomplish that. It's also you also offer me a nice opportunity to point out that when your current leader was responsible for housing, he managed to get only 6 homes built. That is a record we're happy to stand against any day of the week.
Thank you, Minister. And we're going to our next questioner, and that is MP Thompson for the next 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, and welcome again to committee, Minister. And I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but pleased as well that I'm back in my riding today. I would like to reference the school nutrition program, and specifically, we know that every child in Canada deserves to have the best start in life, but nearly 1 in 4 kids just don't get enough food. And this obviously has a real impact on their ability to learn and to grow. And certainly, while the Conservatives seem to be against supporting fairness for every generation, our government, I'm very proud of this, is taking action. And certainly, we're seeing this at the launch of the National School Food Program. Would you outline some of the benefits of this program, please?
Yeah. Joanne, Ms. Thompson, thank you very much for the question. I know that you, like me, are a mother. I know that you have worked as a nurse. I know how much you know and care about Canada's children. And I must say that the National School Food Program is one of the things I am most pleased that we're able to invest in this budget. This investment means that an additional 400,000 Canadian children will get some food in school, before school. I know that you, like me, have had heartbreaking conversations with school teachers who talk about how in Canada today, they have students who come to school and they can't focus because they're hungry, I know that you, like me, have talked to teachers who say they spend their own money to buy some snacks to bring to school to give to those kids. We, thanks to this investment, are going to be able to provide nutritious, healthy snacks to 400,000 more Canadian children. I think that is surely a measure we should all support. And I do have to point out, this is just one example of why we need a government that recognizes the importance of investing in Canada and Canadians. This is a reason why austerity and cuts always, always, always hurt the most vulnerable. They hurt the people who need help the most. They hurt Canada's children. And that's why I am so glad that our government, with this budget that promises fairness for every generation, is investing in the youngest Canadians.
Thank you. And I want to actually stay with young Canadians or younger Canadians for another moment. And we know that young Canadians were disproportionately affected by COVID-19 pandemic. And it's interesting to me in so many of the comments we hear here at committee, we seem to forget the very difficult period of time that this government, I believe, did a remarkable job in navigating Canadians through. But the young Canadians are now, they certainly faced the worst of the pandemic, and they're still feeling the economic pinch. And I certainly feel, and I believe government does, that it's very important that we address the struggles that young Canadians are experiencing, and particularly around the high cost of living. And I'm glad and I'm very pleased to see that so many of the investments in budget 2024 really addresses concerns for young Canadians. And I'm wondering if you could speak to this. You referenced some of the programs, certainly in your opening statements, but I'd be really interested. And I think it's important to outline in a little more detail the specifics of what is in the budget to really help young Canadians who are feeling that the opportunities are not available to them that certainly were available to their parents.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. And I could not agree more. This is a budget for fairness for every generation, with a particular focus on millennials and Gen Z. And that is because we recognize that today the promise of Canada, that good middle class life, if you study hard and have a good job, it's just too hard to reach it. And that's why in the budget, we are aggressively investing in housing, in measures to make life more affordable, in economic growth and productivity. And we're doing it all in a fiscally responsible way because we understand that that is also part of our promise to young Canadians. So how do we make the math work? We're doing that by asking those who are doing the very, very best in our society to contribute a little bit more. That's a budget that delivers fairness for every generation. And specifically for younger Canadians, I want to highlight two measures. One, and I'm going to smile at Don Davies, is free prescription contraceptives. It is high time to deliver this for all Canadians. It is especially important for young Canadian women. As we were putting together this plan, I spoke to gynecologists and obstetricians who said to me that every month they have young women who come to their offices who are pregnant and don't want to be. And the reason for that, these young women say, teenagers, some of them, is they can't afford to pay for prescription contraceptives and they're too scared to ask their parents for the money, or maybe their parents don't have the money. Every single young woman who goes in to see a gynecologist or an obstetrician in that situation, that is a tragedy for her. It's a tragedy for our country. And I am really, really glad that we are now taking action to change that.
Minister, and now we'll move to MP Samadi, and thank you, MP Thompson.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, bon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hello and welcome, Mr. Jovanovich, and certainly to the Minister. Yes, each time that I asked questions of your colleague, he replied in impeccable French. So, there are 4 subjects that I'd like to deal with today, if I have time, but I'm going to start with one important one, and that deals with the part that is intended to regulate the open banking system. We understand that there will be a follow-up in the fall to what is actually in this bill to further protect consumers. But in C69, you have framed the skeleton of this open banking system. I'm very concerned because this type of regulation that's being put in place will be controlled by the federal government rather than you're taking the model where each province would have equal standards. So it seems to me this means that there's going to be a 2-speed system here. Toronto banks, subject to the federal government, will fall under the federal government regulations, but credit unions and the Caisse Desjardins and the reserve branches will fall under provincial legislation and Quebec legislation. In the 21st century, if people want to participate in open banking, they would have to have the authorization of the province. That the province would have to exercise its right to legislation so that it could participate in open banking. So this is a centralization of power, to my mind, a concentration of power. But the provinces weren't consulted until very recently about this.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question, which is specific and concrete, a very tangible issue. I'm going to begin by reassuring you that we respect the role of the provinces and the territories in the financial system. And certainly, we will not and we do not want to impose anything. We understand the importance for the provinces and for the territories of working in close cooperation with the federal government in terms of this new system. The Minister of Finance of Quebec and I have had many contacts, excellent cooperation from Quebec. So again, I say this is an important issue, and I do take very seriously the role of the Caisse Populaire that you have brought up. They are an important element of our financial system, and we always have to include them. On the other hand, another element that we have to reflect on, as you have said, is that the world is progressing. Open system banking is something that people want in good French, so I'll copy you. If you have that system, you have to have a modern economy in our own country. But I can tell you this: we are moving ahead. We are taking into consideration the wishes and the ideas of the provinces and the territories, including Quebec, very seriously, and particularly since a Caisse Populaire role is very important for you. And let me add one more thing. Investors, innovators, Quebec entrepreneurs, all of these people in Quebec are playing a key role in the ecosystem of fintechs. And so this is really perhaps one of the most progressive, advanced groups of investors in our system. According to the conversations that I have had with Quebec entrepreneurs, they feel that it is very important for them. They want to move ahead. They have that capacity to innovate in that sector. Thank you very much for your comments and your answer, and also the respect that you have demonstrated for Quebec as a jurisdiction and its institutions like the Caisse Populaire. In C69, the system that you are progressing on is an optional one. The option is to stay in the 21st century or to reverse course and move backwards from the 21st century. Banking regulation is something that would surround that, but it has to go through the provinces, where the provinces would voluntarily renounce their areas of jurisdiction concern, and that would revert to federal hands. So the concern is this: once you let an area of jurisdiction go, will the province have to duplicate and double its legal services, say, for within the province, so that there is one system for open banking at the federal level and one for provincial systems if they choose to do so? This is a concern that is quite pronounced, particularly when the banks would have to deal with the businesses that are interacting with it. I think that under C69, there is a grave concern. So my question is this: do you foresee a system like securities that could be set up within a province where there could be self-regulation? Thank you.
Going to have to hold on to that, and in another round answer MP Summities, because we're way over time. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of informal chat to also speak to that. But we are well over time. So MP Davies now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being with us today. Minister, I know we have about a $40 billion deficit, and there's different ways to address deficits over time. We can cut expenditures, as I think the Conservatives would do. There's growth in the economy, which I think everybody hopes for, and there's raising revenue, and hopefully in a fair and measured way. Given that oil and gas extraction companies in Canada made a record $63 billion in profits in 2022, and I think they're on track to come close to that in 2023. Can you explain why your government has declined to impose an excess profits tax on the oil and gas sector, as it did do for banks and insurance companies in 2022, who made significantly less profits?
Okay, I do, though. I'm going to start just with a little lighthearted commentary here, okay? And you guys have to forgive me. I hope you will forgive me, because Mr. Davies and I have known each other for longer than anybody else in this room has known each other. So the question I want to start with is, who are you cheering for, the Oilers or the Canucks? It's a tough question. I was facing similar challenges in my own house, but the Leafs are out.
Well, given where my voters live, it's an easy one to answer.
Okay.
Go Canucks, go Canucks.
Okay. Well, then one thing that we are going to differ on is my house is now cheering for the Oilers with a clear conscience.
As long as a Canadian team wins the Stanley Cup, I'm happy.
Okay, I think maybe the committee could have unanimous consent around that idea. Okay, sorry to take up the time. I just couldn't resist. Look, our government does believe that part of a responsible and effective economic plan that delivers fairness for every generation means you have to make the investments that Canadians need. And to do it in a fiscally responsible way, you have to raise revenue. As you know, because I heard you talk about this in the House earlier this week, the main revenue raiser in this budget is raising the capital gains inclusion rate. And that's the right thing to do. That really is a way to deliver fairness for every generation. And I think that measure really appropriately asks those who have benefited the most from everything that is great about Canada to contribute a little bit more for the next generation. And I think it does it without hurting. It does it in a way that maintains Canada's strength as an investment destination, Canada's economic strength, our ability for our economy to grow. So that's why we chose that particular measure. I have more to say, but I think you want to say something, so I better shut up.
Thank you, Mr. Well, maybe I can give you some more room on that because you may have anticipated a bit where I'm going to go because another potential revenue item is corporate taxes generally. And I think I've put this to you before. In the United States, President Biden is proposing to increase the U.S. corporate income tax rate to 28% from the current 21%. And I know that it seems to be a key economic feature in Canada that we need to keep Canadian corporate taxes competitive relative to the United States. I think we all accept that. But if the United States, right now we're at 50 and they're at 21, if the U.S. is raising their corporate tax rate to 28%, another 7, do you agree with me that that opens up room for us to have a measured increase in corporate tax rates in Canada that would help with revenue for the federal government while also keeping Canadian businesses competitive vis-a-vis the U.S.?
So, Mr. Davies, a thing that I learned very early on in the NAFTA negotiations and became a rule I set for myself is never to make commitments based on a hypothetical, particularly when it comes to political events in the United States. But I am going to make 2 general comments because I think you raise an important issue. Number one, I do think all of us need to be thoughtful about Canada's global competitiveness. The Department of Finance, Mio is the head of tax policy, so he's in charge of all the hardest stuff finance does. The other finance people will be mad that I said that, but has an internationally respected kind of engine that calculates METR, the marginal effective tax rate, comparing Canada to other economies. We had a table from METR in the budget, and we look at that closely all the time to be sure we are competitive. It's a relative measure. The second thing that I'll say is I do think we, as people in Western democracies, have been living through a period of a race to the bottom when it comes to taxation. And you've seen in every single country a real corporate push to drive rates down and to say to citizens, you have to accept this because otherwise the capital will move to another jurisdiction. And that's why I think the OECD 2-pillar process is so important, to try to put a floor to that. And I do think that kind of collective action helps us as Western democracies to maintain the revenue base, which we need to make the investments that, in our case, Canadians need.
Thanks, Mr. Wright. Do I have some time?
A real quick question and answer. Yeah.
Real quick on the Canada Disability Benefit, there's 1.4 million Canadians living in poverty. Your proposal would help about 600,000. You promised it would lift people out of poverty, but it's only $200 a month. Minister, are you willing to increase that amount in this budget? And are you willing to look at the eligibility criteria so that every Canadian living with a disability, living in poverty in this country, will actually be lifted out of poverty?
Mr. Davies, that it's a very significant investment in the budget right now. It's a big deal that as a country, for the first time, we're putting a benefit in place. Our government and I personally certainly share your aspiration that this needs to be just a first step and we need to go further. I do think it's important to take it step by step and get the system carefully in place. Something I think we need to be thoughtful about is to ensure that additional federal spending actually goes to the people who need it and doesn't get lost through clawbacks of various kinds. And I think acting in a step-by-step way is the best way to ensure that.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Davies, Minister. So we are members moving into our second round. This will be our final round, and I am to have to hold pretty tight to the timeline so that that we can get through it. We're starting with MP Lawrence for 5 minutes, please. Yep.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for appearing before committee today. Minister, simple, straightforward question for you. Which country has the worst per person income drop in the G7 in the last 5 years?
Very good to see you, Mr. Lawrence. And I think I can see the direction you're wanting to travel in. And so let me reassure you by pointing out that in the last quarter of 2023, Canada had a healthy move in GDP. The first quarter of this year shows strong GDP, 2.5%, and we're seeing that reflected in the productivity numbers too.
Thank you, Minister. What was the per capita GDP growth in Q4?
As I said, I can see the direction you're going, and that's why let me take this opportunity to highlight good, solid GDP numbers in Q4 of 2023, really good GDP numbers in the first quarter of this year. And in terms of productivity and per capita GDP, I think the outlook for this year is really quite positive. To take one project alone, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Governor of the Bank of Canada estimates that's going to add 0.25 to GDP growth in the second quarter of this year alone. Stephen Pelosi thinks it's going to be 0.5%, and that will translate into the per capita numbers.
Thank you, and I'm glad you're a fan of oil and gas there. That's good to hear. But I want to get back to my original question. Which country had the worst per person income drop in the G7 over the last 5 years?
I think that I have spoken to some relevant measures of economic growth and talked about how we're seeing growth doing really well, particularly considering the widespread predictions Canada was going to suffer a recession, including from your side of the House. I think a measure that it is worth pointing to, and I would point all members of this committee to some commentary recently written on Bloomberg by Tyler Cohen, a U.S. economist. A very important measure is median income. That captures that captures the life of the middle class. And on median income, Canada has had steady growth over the past decade and looks really good compared to comparable economies.
Thank you, Minister. Are you? Could you just please answer this question? If you don't know, just say you don't know. That's fine. What country had the worst per person income drop in the G7 in the last 5 years?
I think I've spoken to where I see the important measures of growth, productivity, and median income. One of the things that's valuable about looking at the median income measure is, as everyone is aware, because of some of the COVID dynamics, Canada had a real surge in the number of non-permanent residents in this country. People like international students. Obviously, an international student won't have the income of someone who has been working here for many years, and that does have an impact on the numbers. The budget included a section devoted to talking about these economic impacts, and I would point people to median income
Minister,
as a really
I do
good measure
appreciate
that speaks to
and I would
people's
love to get
lives.
to some of the underlying, but first we need to sort of put where the baseline is. And so just to put an answer on that is that Canada is the worst in the GD7 of income drop over the last 5 years in the G7. The U.S. is at 8% increase. Italy is about 7%. Japan is a little shy of 4%. Then we have France, UK, Germany is slightly negative, and Canada is an outlier at negative GDP per capita has a real impact on people. In fact, that's how most economists measure the economic well-being. We've also had 7 quarters now where Canada's GDP per capita has been shrinking. If, in fact, we measured GDP on a per Canada basis, we would be in one of the longest recessions. Since the Liberals formed government, our GDP per capita, our economic growth, has not grown a bit in the last 10 years. We are in a serious economic crisis, and it's troubling to me, Minister. You won't answer basic questions.
Lawrence and Minister, listen, I'm going to have to. I know the Minister has a hard stop at 1, and to get through everybody, we've got to get to MP Zerowitz. Maybe you could follow up when the Conservatives have the floor again. MP Zerowitz, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Minister, Mr. Jovanovic, thank you for being here today. My first question to you, Minister, is on the capital gains inclusion rate. Since you introduced Federal Budget 2024, we've heard a lot of different commentary on the government's plans to increase the capital gains inclusion rate. So can you speak to us and shed light on why these changes will support investments in growth and productivity, and how these changes will play a role in creating fairness for all Canadians of every generation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I'm going to start where you concluded, which is to say this really is a budget for fairness for every generation. And we recognize that that means we have to make investments in Canada, in Canadians, and especially in millennials and Gen Z. That means massive investments in housing. This budget has the most ambitious federal housing plan in Canadian history, nearly 4 million new homes built by 2031. Investments in affordability and the social safety net. We've been discussing some of those, really, really important for all Canadians, especially young Canadians. And crucially, investments in economic growth. The budget includes a $5 billion investment in students, in postdocs, in our universities, in research. That investment in our fundamental intellectual capacity is an investment in young people. It's an investment in the future. The budget includes an investment of more than $2 billion in AI to be sure Canada maintains its strong position in this essential frontier of the global economy. The budget includes really important investments in productivity overall, like the expansion of the ACCA, the Accelerated Capital Cost Allowance. When you talk to businesses, they will say that is a measure that drives investment. And of course, with this measure plus C-59, we will have 4 of our investment tax credits in the clean economy passed into law. That program is essential to ensure that Canada can remain an industrial economy, a manufacturing economy in the 21st century. So we're making really big investments in Canada's economic capacity, and those investments cost money. Now, some people would choose simply not to make any investments, a path of austerity. I think that would be a terrible mistake. Other people might choose to make the investments, but not do it in a fiscally responsible way. We saw that with a sort of far-right budget that didn't last very long put forward in the UK. I think that would be a mistake also. So for our government, which recognizes we need to make investments, we have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. What we're doing is making our tax system more fair and using that fair approach to fund the investments that Canadians need. Now, I think the elephant in the room in this committee, in the House of Commons, in Canada, is the Conservatives really refusing to be clear on their view of tax fairness for every generation. And I think, maybe I think actually we're probably going to end up disagreeing. I think the Conservatives are going to prefer not to invest in Canadians because I think they will find it too challenging to ask those who are doing the best to contribute a little bit more. I think that's a clear line of difference. I think that would be a real mistake for Canada and Canadians.
Thank you. And then just one quick final question. I know you talked about how a strong economy is very important for us. You've talked about investment tax credits. We introduced them in C-59 and now in this budget. Can you talk to us, Minister, about how you see investment tax credits helping Canadian businesses remain competitive in the global market while also pushing Canada towards a more sustainable economy?
Okay, our chair says I can't, but I'll just say
You got
they're
15
important.
seconds. Yeah, very important. That's great. Okay, and but you can maybe in another question, or you'll be able to follow up on that. We're going to MP Summity, and again, 2.5 minutes, 2.5 minutes. MP Summity.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Minister, I'm going to ask you a question on another matter, and with the remaining time, you can answer the question. After you've answered, you can come back to open banking. I was very happy to see Part 2, that is to say, the putting in place of Pillar 2 of the OECD. I congratulate you on all the work that has been done to do so for the changes to the tax system. But in these 300 pages of text that are very difficult to understand, it seems that the breakdown with the provinces for taxes is not apparent. For the tax for Alberta and Quebec that collect taxes on business, what are you planning to do? Thank you. I'm going to, first of all, speak to open banking very quickly, and then I will open this other conversation. I just want to say that, as you know, it's really optional. We do not want to impose it on anyone, but it is important for us to work with the provinces and the territories, with the Caisse Populaire, credit unions. We want to be able to cooperate with you, converse with you, share our ideas with you, because this is an issue that is important and has been much discussed. Now, with respect to Pillar 2, thank you for your understanding. We've discussed that a bit with Mr. Davies. That is to say, the importance of having a multilateral approach, and concerning also the rest of your question, I would say that it is a system that, yes, is very complicated, and all the processes that are linked with the OECD are related to the first pillar, and perhaps it would be better to converse with our other teams to be able to clear this up, because with the first pillar, as you know, is complicated. We continue with the second, but speak to the teams.
For 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Minister, just before I leave the Canada Disability Benefit, last June, this is what Minister Qualtrough, who is responsible for disability inclusion, said. No person with a disability in this country should live in poverty. Yesterday, the Canada Disability Benefit Act became law, creating the framework for a new federal benefit which will lift working-age persons with disabilities out of poverty. I look forward to working with the community this summer as we begin the regulatory process to make the Canada Disability Benefit a reality. Minister, the reaction from the disability community in Canada is overwhelming, that $200 a month is not going to lift anybody out of poverty, really. That's living with a disability. Would you agree with me that maybe as positive a start as this is, that this disability benefit does not meet the promise of this government to establish a benefit that will lift people living with disabilities out of poverty?
Let me say, I think we have the same values and the same aspirations, probably in general, and certainly with regard to this benefit. From my perspective, if we want to build robust and enduring programs for Canada and Canadians, we have to act step by step and ensure that we are building them with the foundation that is going to work. We also have to recognize, I would say we have to recognize two more things. One is Canada is very broad and diverse. And as Mr. Saint-Marie was pointing out, it applies to everything. Thinking about open banking, I think we all share the same vision, but we know we have to take into account what is happening already in different provinces. As you know very well, Mr. Davies, that is true also when it comes to treatment of people living with a disability across the country. And I really believe... I'll stop
okay?
then. Yeah, of course.
thank you. I'd like to move to the school nutrition program. Your budget says it'll help 400,000 people. My calculations, there are 2.2 million kids in Canada, grades 1 to 6. We all know that this program needs to be universal. I want to single out Ryan Turnbull, who's helped on this program. How is this amount of money going to be allocated? What conditions may be attached to this money to make sure that that all children in Canada get universal access to this? Because clearly 400,000 kids won't even come close to having a school nutrition program for 2.2 million kids that need it.
Again, we have been clear with the National School Food Program that we currently have a patchwork. Some kids are getting support, that's great. Some of that support comes through programs supported by the federal government. This measure is a big deal. It's saying we need to build a national school food program, but we need to be practical and build it based on what we have today in Canada, not kind of try to tear it up. But we have a patchwork. Our approach is going to be build on that patchwork with willing partners, and that's why we're saying, sorry.
We're going to have to get in there because now we're over, and I don't want to take up time from the final two members, and I've got MP Chambers on for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, it's always a pleasure to have you here at committee. I'm sure you're always very busy, but it's nice of you to make the time to see us. I want to take you on a vacation. Let's go to Mexico for a second. The government of Mexico's average yield to maturity of their debt is around 18 years. 59% of Mexico's debt is 10-year bonds or longer. And in Canada, our average yield to maturity is 6.9, and our 10-year amount of 10-year bonds we issue as a total of our total debt is 33%. During COVID, we issued, 60% of the debt we issued during COVID was 3 years or under. That's all renewed now at 4 or 5% interest rates instead of being locked in at, say, 1% for 10 years. That's about, rough numbers, it's about $10 billion a year in extra interest payments. Do you think the government made a mistake during COVID by issuing short-term debt instead of long-term debt?
So first of all, I think the people who are taking a break from their regular activities at this committee, which they're very busy with, are the people who have been filibustering the work of this committee. And I'm very grateful, I sincerely am, that people took a break from that important work that the people of Canada appreciate on filibustering to have this conversation. I would also say it's an interesting choice to contrast Canada's fiscal position, our credit rating, our debt management with that of Mexico. I can assure you there is, I haven't talked to every single person in Mexico, but I talked to their government a lot. They would cheerfully trade their position for ours, given our AAA credit rating, which was reaffirmed last week by Moody's. And I'm glad that you're focusing on Canada's debt and our debt issuance, because it gives me an opportunity to highlight an important fact, which is we issued a 5-year global U.S. dollar bond. That's important because the Bank of Canada likes to maintain some U.S. dollar
Minister,
debt.
respectfully, the question is whether we made a mistake.
You were talking about how we're issuing
know,
our
but
debt, and let me just finish my sentence.
We're now half
Let me
into
just
the
finish
2.5
my
minutes
sentence.
here.
The
Okay.
spread on that debt was 10 basis points. It was issued last month, and that is the lowest spread relative to U.S. Treasuries of any
that's
other
wonderful.
issuer. That speaks to the strength of Canada's fiscal position and of our debt management.
The truth is, the decision of the government during COVID to issue short-term debt was absolutely negligent in that it's now costing taxpayers an extra $10 billion a year. You would have extra money to give to Mr. Davies' priorities had you not done that, or other Canadians' priorities. But we'll agree to disagree on that point. Do you know how many people are going to be hired by the measures that are proposed in the budget?
That's a very, very broad question. So what I will say is the measures proposed by the budget, I believe, will increase Canada's growth, will do so in a way that is fiscally responsible and thus allows inflation to continue to stabilize, creating conditions that will allow the Bank of Canada to lower rates. I am very happy to take the opportunity to point out that 1.2 million more Canadians are employed today than were before COVID.
Thank you very much,
I think we're going to
Minister.
see a strongly growing economy, and that will be more jobs for Canadians across the country.
Thank you very much. Every budget bill that comes to this committee, we ask the same question every time, and nobody has an answer. But 25% of the government's savings objectives are actually linked to the shrinking of the public service over time, yet no one actually seems in the government to have a plan for people. But I'll go to my very last question. In our last exchange when you were here, I brought up an individual who's on the Infrastructure Bank board. You're the Deputy Prime Minister. You hold significant influence in cabinet. Has this individual, Ms. Andre-Lise Matteau, has she been asked to leave the Infrastructure Bank board? And are you concerned about the standard that this is setting for people who serve on our Crown corporations?
In your previous question, Mr. Chambers, you didn't specify that you were concerned with the public service. You just talked about employment in Canada. And of course, my objective is to have more Canadians have good jobs. The budget does, though, make clear that we believe that it's important when it comes to the public service to have a leveling off. And you will see clearly in the budget text that we're going to see the size of the public service over time decrease by 5,000 employees. That is absolutely appropriate. It is part of responsible fiscal management.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, MP Chambers. And this will be the final 5 minutes. MP Zerowitz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Minister, I have two questions for you as well. I'm going to start off where I ended off with you last time, where we were talking about the importance of a strong economy for our federal government. And you had introduced investment tax credits in the fall economic statement. You've introduced additional investment tax credits in federal budget 2024. Can you talk to us about how you see investment tax credits helping Canadian businesses remain competitive in a global marketplace while we are pushing Canada towards a more sustainable economy?
Yeah, look, all kind of ritualized jousting aside, I am really glad to have, that was last time, I know, but we haven't jousted that much today. But I do want to be actually really sincere in talking about these investment tax credits. I think they are something that every single MP here should support. Mr. Davies has been clear that he is a Vancouver MP and is cheering for the Canucks. But something Mr. Davies and I and Mr. Halan have in common is a close connection to Alberta. These tax credits are really important for Alberta. So I would say to Mr. Halan directly, please help us get them passed into law. The last time I was in Calgary, I heard from Alberta business, we really need these tax credits. We need the certainty that comes from them being actual law in order to make investments. So that's sort of speaking to those with Alberta connections. Julie, you and Ryan and I, and I think Mr. Chambers and Mr. Lawrence are all Ontario MPs. And oh my God, and our chair. So there are a lot of Ontario MPs here, and our province is so much a workhorse for the Canadian economy. I am proud of generations of Canadians that, unlike some other major industrialized economies, we didn't give up our manufacturing base in the 80s and 90s, as happened in some other sort of peer countries. And right now, we're at a moment when, as a country, we have to decide, do we continue to be a strong, powerful, industrialized manufacturing economy in the clean transition? These tax credits are about the government saying this is absolutely essential, and we're going to do it. Et Monsieur Saint-Marie, une chose que je veux souligner.
One thing that I want to point out is that we have worked with the province of Ontario. There's a population there, which is certainly large. We've had extraordinary cooperation with the province of Quebec as well as with Ontario. Mr. Legault certainly shares the idea that at this point in time in the world economy, we should have an industrial policy in which the government participates. We have to participate in this consensus, because if not, capital will not be invested here at home.
The proof of the pudding is in the results. And in 2023, Canada had the most FDI per capita of any G7 country, the highest total quantum of FDI, third highest in the world. Only the US and Brazil were ahead of us, much more populous countries.
Time for another question?
Well, you got 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll just say thank you then. Thank you for coming here today. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Zerwitz, and thank you, Minister. We're right at 1 o'clock. We want to thank you for coming here before our committee on C-69, the Budget Implementation Act, but more so in bringing all of us together and cheering for either the Canucks, the Oilers, and hopefully a Canadian team that goes on to win the Stanley Cup. So we are all in agreement with that. Thank you. Have a wonderful day today, and we thank Mr. Janovic. And I know I've got it. I probably didn't pronounce it correct again, but we thank you for coming here and being with us. And thank you. Okay, members, we are suspended now.